Welcome back and thank you for joining us again. This PowerPoint presentation and the accompanying narration was created for East Texas Baptist University for use in course Criminal Justice 4302 Community Policing, and I am Dr. Eric Hillman. The textbook that we use in this class is entitled Community Policing, 8th edition, by Miller, Hess, and Orthman. As you review this video, you should be taking notes for the next upcoming exam, but also this video is designed to supplement the reading of the textbook and not to replace it. We're in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 has been divided into several segments to allow for easier viewing on your part and easier uploading. So this is Chapter 4B, the second segment of Chapter 4, Problem Solving and Proactive. In the last segment, we talked about incidents and problems, and probably would be good to take a closer look at what we mean when we talk about these two things. What is an incident? An incident is an isolated event that requires a police response. As you recall in Chapter 1, when we talked about the professional era of policing, trying to make police more professional, and one of the main goals was faster response times. And so the professional era policing was incident driven. The police waited for calls to come in and then got to those calls as soon as possible. Since the implementation of the 911 system, the public has a much higher expectation of a fast response time by the police departments and sheriff's departments. When 911 calls come in, we can't ignore them. So these 911 calls dictate the use of a reactive police response. So when we talk about wanting police to be more proactive, we're not saying they cease to be reactive. We're saying they need to be proactive in addition to being reactive. In fact, there's no way that police cannot be reactive because we have to respond to calls for help. The problem, however, is that when someone calls in with an emergency, that's a symptom or a result of a problem rather than the actual cause of the problem. So yes, police should be reactive. Yes, police should address the symptoms, but police need to go farther than that. Police need to look underneath the symptoms to the causes of the problems. POP means problem-oriented policing, as we defined it in the last segment. Problem-oriented policing seeks to move past the symptoms or the single incidents to identify the problems and their underlying causes. So there's 3 steps there. First, you're notified of the symptom. Secondly, you identify the problem. And third, you identify the cause of the problem. The 3-step progression then. The first step is reactive. When people call the police, whether it's 911 or they flag you down, you've got to respond to their request for assistance. So the first step is reactive. Respond to those incidents. The second step becomes proactive. When you see several incidents, you can link those incidents, if they are recurring, and perhaps identify a problem that's causing those incidents. And the third step is also proactive. Once you identify the causes, the problems, then you identify the underlying causes of the problem. So 1 reactive step and 2 proactive steps. Respond to the incident, number 1, that's reactive. Identify the problem, number 2, that's proactive. And 3, determine the underlying cause of the problem, also proactive. Community policing and problem-oriented policing. Some people say these are two sides of the same coin, that community policing is the philosophy of involving the community in the policing process, and problem-oriented policing is the practical application of that philosophy to actually solve real-world problems. So police and community members should discuss and agree on what? The problems. Well, maybe you can easily see a problem. Maybe you say to yourself, I'm smart, I'm college educated, I'm a police officer, I can see that there's a problem. And that may very well be the case. But sometimes the community doesn't agree that that is actually a problem. For instance, if you see teenagers playing basketball in the basketball court in a public park at midnight, and you think, we got a 10 o'clock curfew on public parks, that's a problem. Well, maybe the community doesn't see that as a problem. Maybe the community is saying to themselves, we'd much rather have these teenagers playing basketball in the park at midnight than out committing crimes. So perhaps the community doesn't see it as a problem. So discuss, in community meetings, discuss the issues and try to reach an agreement on what actually is a problem. Secondly, even if the community agrees it's a problem, they might think, well, they get a little loud, they play their music too loud at midnight. Even though they may see it as a problem, the second level of that discussion is, do the police need to respond to that problem? So the community and the police discuss, yes, they're breaking a curfew, and yes, the music is a little loud. Should we then break up that basketball game and disperse, tell them all to go home, and then have them wandering the streets, perhaps getting in trouble, maybe breaking into cars or whatever? And so the community and the police, secondly, need to discuss, should the police actually address that problem? Should there be a police response to that problem? Assuming that the community and the police agree that, first of all, there's a problem, and secondly, the police need to respond to it, the police must then look at that problem and analyze it. Analyze it for its underlying causes. When the police respond to a problem, it may or may not solve the problem. Ideally, the police response solves the problem, but that's not always the case in the real world. So how do we determine if the police response solved the problem? How do we determine success? Well, even success, just like the community police dialogue determines if there's a problem, and the community police dialogue determines if the police should respond to a problem, the community police dialogue also determines if the police response was successful in solving the problem. In all these levels, we involve community leaders. Why? Because our job is to protect and serve. These are the taxpayers who pay our salaries to solve these problems. Well, lack of success? What if you don't solve the problem? And what if you agree, and the community agrees, that the police response was not effective and did not solve the problem? Well, first of all, that's not a rare situation. Oftentimes, we fail. Oftentimes, we don't accomplish our goals in many areas of life, not just police work. And so what happens when you don't accomplish your goal? Do you just give up, sit down and die? Of course not. You evaluate what you did, you evaluate what went wrong, and you try to improve on it. And so while success is the goal and success is good, a lack of success is actually a learning opportunity. They say that Thomas Edison had more than 100 different experiments to create a light bulb before he actually succeeded. And so every time he failed, he didn't give up. Every time he failed, that was a learning opportunity. And even failure is success, because When Thomas Edison failed for the 99th time, he was able to say, well, here's 99 ways that it won't work. So he's slowly eliminating what didn't work, and therefore is becoming closer to what does work. And so every time you have a lack of success, lack of achieving your goal, in community policing and problem-oriented policing, you look at it as a learning opportunity. Okay, this didn't work. Why didn't it work? And what can we do better next time? The key elements of problem-oriented policing. First of all, group several incidents as a problem. If you have simply one incident, that wouldn't qualify as a problem, but several incidents that are recurring can be a problem. Determine which of those problems that you've identified are of concern to the public. Again, perhaps the public is more concerned that you use your limited resource to solve more serious problems than something simple like teenagers playing basketball in the park after curfew. What does the public want you to address? Focusing on problems is the heart of problem-oriented policing. You identify the problems and you're there to solve those problems. And that's more than just threatening to throw everyone in jail. That's looking to underlying problems and causes of those problems. When you do examine a problem, you need to use systematic inquiry, meaning you need to be thorough. You don't just say, okay, this problem is caused by that person, throw them in jail, problem solved. Instead, you use a systematic inquiry that looks at all aspects of the problem, all inputs of the problem, and all possible solutions to the problem. So do a thorough analysis. Sometimes the underlying causes are not what they first appear. And by doing a thorough analysis, you're making sure that you are addressing the true underlying causes and not perhaps a stereotype in your mind as to what the underlying cause is. When you do take incidents and group them into problems, you've got to be careful not to give overly broad labels. You need to be able to identify separate problems. So if you simply say, crime is too high in this neighborhood, well, that's a pretty broad label. People are scared in this neighborhood is a pretty broad label. So what you want to do is group those incidents into smaller problems, problems that can be addressed, problems that you can develop a plan for solving. So too broad of a problem like crime is too high in this neighborhood, how could you possibly hope to have a plan to address that tonight or tomorrow night? So instead, you identify a smaller problem. Car burglaries are a problem in this apartment complex, would be a problem that's manageable in size that you can address. So you don't want too broad of a label. You want an individual problem that you can actually have a plan to address. We've talked about it before, but there's multiple constituents. You need to identify multiple interests in problems and weigh them when evaluating responses. Different people have different interests, different people have different concerns, and different people and organizations are affected in different ways by the police response. That's why you want to go in the community and see what the concerns are and why. Perhaps a certain community group would be on board, but they don't support you because of some small element of your plan that goes against what their interests are. Perhaps you could modify that element of the plan to satisfy that constituency group and get them on board. Suddenly you have a major community group or a major church or a major business organization on your side, because you're able to sit down with them and address their concerns, and you realize that you could actually modify your plan to satisfy their needs. You also have to look at your current response. Almost always, if there is a problem, the police are probably doing something about it. What are we doing now? Is it working or not? And if not, is it partially working? And if it's partially working, perhaps we should keep part of the current response and get rid of part of the current response and replace it with something more effective. So ask yourself, what are we doing now? Is it working? Is it partially working? Should parts of the current response be kept, or should the entire current response be scrapped in favor of something better? It's also important to acknowledge the limits of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system cannot solve all problems by ourselves. The criminal justice system doesn't have all the answers. Crime is a problem of the heart. It's a matter of choice. It's a problem of opportunity. It's a problem of economic circumstances. There's all different kinds of issues, many of which are beyond the scope of the criminal justice system. So when you acknowledge the limits of what you can do, that sometimes opens the doors to partnering, because those who you partner with in the community may have the resources to solve the problem in a way that you do not. Encourage a broad search for solutions. Don't just identify a problem and simply say, all right, this is how we solve it. Instead, think outside the box is a good way of putting this. Talk to your officers, other officers, and get their ideas. Brainstorm. Officers should not be afraid to, in meetings, whether with the community or whether with other officers, give ideas of things that might happen. Maybe an officer who normally is quiet has a great idea for solving the problem that's based on a conversation he had with a community group leader or a minister or a shop owner. And if he's not encouraged to speak up, you'd never hear that idea. Or even if his idea won't completely work, maybe elements of his idea can be incorporated with other ideas. So think outside the box. Adopt a proactive stance, meaning make it part of your philosophy of policing to look for problems and underlying causes, seek them out, and solve them. Don't just be satisfied to sit in your police car and answer calls for service, because those are symptoms, and you'll never solve crime merely by chasing it around. You've got to address the underlying causes. More and more police departments are looking for college-educated officers. Why? Because, first of all, you're exposed to a lot more ideas and a lot more cultures in college, but because you, as a college-educated student, are able to think proactively, are able to analyze, are able to put on paper what you want to accomplish in the form of a plan. So officers need to be involved in the decision-making processes, and then when officers are assigned tasks, they need to be held accountable for those tasks. When you do, in fact, institute a new response, you've got to evaluate the results of that. So just as earlier you critiqued or evaluated your current response, when you decided a new response was in order and you implemented it, now you have results of a new response. And so it's a continuing evaluation cycle. It's very important when evaluating the police response to allow officers to say, this is working well, this is not working well. One of the key failures of police management is to want to blame someone, so they identify something that went wrong and then try to blame someone for it going wrong. Officers will not identify what's going wrong if they feel they might be blamed for it. So officers need to feel free to say, Sergeant, Lieutenant, Captain, Assistant Chief, Chief, this is not working. I think it needs to be improved. And he needs to be able to do that without fear of retaliation. Otherwise, the whole system closes down if officers are afraid to give new ideas. There are two words that may at first seem very similar to you, but actually have different meanings. Efficiency versus effectiveness. What do we mean by these two? The word efficiency can be defined as minimizing waste, expense, and unnecessary effort. Certainly that's a good goal. We don't want waste and expense and unnecessary effort. So if we can minimize those, that's a good goal. A little phrase, a three-word phrase that describes efficiency is doing things right. To simplify it. How does that differ from effectiveness? Effectiveness means producing the desired result. And the little phrase that describes that is doing the right thing. What's the difference? Doing things right versus doing the right thing. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. Can you have one without the other? Let's look at one side of that equation. Can you have effectiveness without efficiency? So, effectiveness is producing the desired result. Let's say that we have a problem with cars speeding in a school zone, and the school and the parents are worried that the children, even though they're walking across the street in the crosswalk, might get hit by these speeding cars. So, we want to produce the desired result. We want to protect the children. That is effectiveness, producing the desired result. Can we have effectiveness without efficiency? Well, sure we can. We could call in the National Guard and have them park Army military tanks on each side of the crosswalk and allow the children to walk across the crosswalk between the tanks. And with these multi-ton tanks guarding the children, they're not going to get hit by cars. So, do we have effectiveness? Are we producing the desired result of keeping the children safe? Yes, we are. But do we have efficiency? Are we minimizing waste, expense, and unnecessary effort? Well, we clearly don't have efficiency. Surely the expense of bringing in the National Guard is a lot of unnecessary effort. So there's an example of when we have effectiveness, we have the desired result, but we don't have efficiency. We can have effectiveness, yes, but since all those resources are being wasted, we do not have efficiency. So yes, we can have effectiveness without efficiency. What about the other way around? Can you have efficiency without effectiveness? So efficiency is minimizing waste. Can you minimize the waste without producing the desired result? And the answer to that is no. Why is that? Because any effort that we have that doesn't achieve the goal is wasted. So efficiency means minimizing waste without effectiveness. Well, if we are not producing the desired result, everything we're doing is wasted. So no, it's not possible to have efficiency without effectiveness, because if we don't have effectiveness, then by definition, everything we're doing is unnecessary effort. Ideally, of course, we want efficiency and effectiveness. We want to do things right, and we want to do the right things. In the professional era, from the 1930s to the 1980s, the emphasis was on efficiency, fast response times, large number of tickets, over effectiveness. Well, efficiency is good. No one's saying that efficiency isn't good, but it may have ignored effectiveness. Community policing emphasizes effectiveness also, as well as efficiency. So community policing is trying to get officers to think about desired outcomes and not just efficiency. However, if we have increased effectiveness, if we're achieving our desired outcomes, that should also increase efficiency, because if we're achieving our desired outcomes, eventually problems are being solved, which makes the whole system more efficient, because as problems are solved, resources can be used elsewhere. What common mistakes are there in problem solving? First of all, failing to resolve important issues, perhaps by, as they say, majoring on the minors, spending all your resources on small issues instead of important issues. Spending too much time on unimportant details instead of the more important details or issues. Having a closed mind, deciding ahead of time what do you think the problem is and how you're going to deal with it. And your thoughts and your actions may be motivated by biases and stereotypes. So you have to open your mind to new ideas. Not expressing your ideas. You're afraid that people might laugh at you, but maybe since you've been out on the street and you understand what's happening on the street, you may have actually a better idea to solve this problem than the sergeant or lieutenant or captain does. So you have to feel free to express your ideas. Everything you do has a cost, and if you fail to consider the cost, whether it's in materials or personnel costs, overtime, whatever, if you don't consider those costs, your problem-solving efforts can be wasted. Failing to consider the stakeholders. Many different people in the community, as we said, have many different ideas of what needs to be done and have many different interests. So you need to consider the stakeholders in order to increase the chance of your problem-solving efforts being successful. Making decisions while angry or tired. If you're angry, walk away. If you're tired, get some rest before you make a major decision. That's not only true in police work, that's true in relationships, marriage, business decisions, everything. And that's the end of Chapter 4B, the second segment of Chapter 4. Once you finish viewing this segment and taking notes, feel free to move on to Chapter 4C. Have a great day.